Dear Cuban heroes, Renee Gonzalez, Fernando Gonzalez, ministers, Caridad Diego, Hermano, Oscar Rivera, and esteemed panelists, conference organizers, and sisters and brothers from across the globe. It is my distinct honor to be here to address this 4th International Conference on World Balance on the occasion of this 60th anniversary of the triumph of the Cuban Revolution. I am grateful for this opportunity to speak on the significance and importance of international solidarity. In this era of neo-colonialism and at a time when many in the world are embracing a fascist ideology and approach to world leadership, the significance of international solidarity takes on a new and important meaning. This is clearly evident in the United States, where the U.S. empire is now being run by an ego-driven, power-hungry, and hate-filled emperor who is fully committed to world hegemony. Still, friends, make no mistake, at its root, this commitment is the same as it's been for his predecessors, throughout perhaps seemingly a slightly more benign or polished style. But as our Brazilian sister said, the U.S. is not Trump. And the U.S. empire's historical embrace of manifest destiny of world dominance is accompanied by a healthy diet of lies and distortions courtesy of the mainstream U.S. media. The kind of fake news that Dr. Romanet spoke of last night. The U.S. public is told that we are the guardians of world peace and that we are surrounded by evil forces that hate us because of our exclusive commitment to freedom and democracy. The possibility that we are being, quote, attacked in the U.S. because we are supporting death and destruction around the world in places like Afghanistan and Iraq and Yemen, just to name a few, is rarely part of the public debate. Yet it cannot be denied that the U.S. government has hundreds of military installations across the globe and sells more weapons of war than the rest of the world's arms traffickers combined. As we witness the U.S. government's attack on various nations of the world, international solidarity is needed more than ever. And that is why, as citizens of empire, we in the U.S. carry an extra responsibility to do what we can to oppose U.S. imperialism. We must be clear that it is a time to end wars and other tools of regime change, to become a cooperative member of the world community, and to prioritize the needs of people and protection of the planet. And when our elected officials fail to do so, we know then that we, the people of the U.S., must step up and act. This is the duty of those of us living inside the belly of the beast, as Jose Marti astutely referred to the U.S. empire. That is why, from its inception, my organization, IFCO, the Interreligious Foundation for Community Organization, has defended the fight for social justice in both the U.S. and across the world. And an essential part of our work has been our focus on making links between struggles in the U.S. and the international community. IFCO was born in the U.S. at a time of active, radical protest against various forms of oppression and injustice. At the height of the struggle for Black liberation, the rights of Native Americans, our Chicano brothers and sisters, political prisoners, and more. As a foundation committed to progressive community organizing, IFCO has historically linked the struggles of the disenfranchised living in the U.S. with the struggles of those in the international community. And this history of international solidarity is the history that I want to speak about a little bit this afternoon. IFCO was founded in 1967 by progressive faith leaders and community activists with the goal of empowering the defenseless in their fight for social justice. For more than 50 years, IFCO has worked on a variety of domestic issues in the United States, including fighting the violence of the Ku Klux Klan, supporting the struggles of the American Indian movement and farm labor organizers and other workers, lifting up the fight for a just health care system and against environmental racism. Equally, on the international front, our work has involved support for African liberation movements, organizing a sterilization abuse project to draw attention to the plight of our Black and Latina sisters in the U.S. and Puerto Rico. And at that time, fully 1/3 of all women of childbearing age in Puerto Rico had been involuntarily sterilized by the U.S. healthcare system. IFCO organized one of the earliest climate change campaigns under the banner of RAINS, Relief for Africans in Need in the Sahel, in response to West Africa's drought crisis in the 1970s. And IFCO declared its support for strategies to assist Haitian refugees fleeing the brutal Duvalier regime and urged the National Council of Churches to fund refugee support projects and to advocate for them. In the late 70s and early 80s, IFCO began its work in Central America and the Caribbean, supporting those fighting for self-determination. And as the Reagan administration's policies in Central America produced ever more tragic results, the struggle for self-determination in Central America became a major focus of IFCO's activity. IFCO viewed the Sandinista revolution and the insurrection in El Salvador as powerful models for the struggle within the U.S. against U.S. imperialism, against U.S. militarism and racism, economic exploitation. And under the wise and visionary leadership of our founding director, my father, the late Reverend Lucius Walker, IFCO saw the importance of drawing parallels and links between the Nicaraguan struggle and the struggle for Black and Latino communities for social justice in the United States. IFCO began conducting extensive action and education campaigns in Central America around issues that were of import, and we did this in selected states and congressional districts across the U.S. The project was known as the Central America Information Campaign. We brought resource people from various parts of the region to the U.S. to speak directly about the reality of their country's policies, courtesy of U.S. foreign policy in the region. As part of the campaign, we also began organizing study delegations to Central America to provide people from the U.S. with the first-hand understanding of the impact of Reagan's policies. It was during a study delegation to Nicaragua that my father and I were leading that we experienced the brutality of the U.S.-backed Contra forces referred to as freedom fighters by the U.S. government. On a passenger ferry that was traveling from the coastal community of Bluefields to the capital city of Managua, along with 200 Nicaraguan civilians, we were attacked by the Contra. Initially, it was individual gunfire, followed by automatic machine gunfire, and eventually heavy artillery that violently shook that vessel from side to side. 2 people were killed in that attack, and 29 were wounded, including my father. The next day, the newspaper headlines in bold type quoted my dad as saying, "Reagan es asesino." As he lay in the hospital, he prayed for an appropriate response and conceived of a project that would allow regular U.S. citizens to conduct their own foreign policy, and he called it an alternative foreign policy. He named that project Pastors for Peace. And 6 months after that brutal Contra attack, our first caravan arrived in Managua, Nicaragua on Christmas Eve of 1988. A message of love and solidarity from the U.S. people, in direct and intentional contradiction to the U.S. government's lethal policy of so-called low-intensity warfare against the Nicaraguan people. For the past 31 years, working with progressive forces in the region through Pastors for Peace, we have organized dozens of caravans and delivered hundreds of tons of humanitarian aid to Nicaragua and El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, and Chiapas, Mexico. And finally, in collaboration with our faith leaders here in Cuba and the international community, IFCO began organizing caravans to Cuba in 1992 to fight the profound misinformation campaign about Cuba and the brutal effects of the U.S. blockade of Cuba, to challenge the U.S. government's travel restrictions, and to allow caravanistas to see Cuba for themselves. Through our Pastors for Peace project, we have worked with hundreds of churches and community groups and Cuba solidarity organizations across the U.S. to educate about the Cuban reality, as well as with our international partners in Canada and Mexico, Europe, and parts of the global South. It is important to explain that we organize our caravans as an act of civil disobedience, following in the footsteps of Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King and Cesar Chavez. Without applying for or accepting U.S. government permission, we've collected and delivered symbolic aid to our Cuban family to illustrate our solidarity with the Cuban people and our opposition to the U.S. government's long-standing brutal blockade of Cuba. We felt and still feel that to accept a U.S. government license to travel to Cuba and to deliver our aid was and is designed to dictate where we go, who we see, what we do when we travel to Cuba. In short, to control our experience in Cuba. As a matter of principle, we have never accepted a license to bring our aid, our caravans to Cuba, and we never will. As my father said time and time again, love is our license.